Okay. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about the 9 planets, the grahas, and it's a really interesting subject, and this is one of the most fundamental things to learn in Vedic astrology, because when you're reading a chart, you'll be looking at the planets, where the planets are located in a chart. And so the planets have their own personality. You can think about them as though they are each an individual with their own personality. So when you look at a chart, and for example, you look at the moon in a person's chart, you'll immediately know that you're looking at the person's personality having to do with their emotions. When you look at Mars, you already know you're looking at the person's ambitious energy. When you look at Saturn, you're looking at how hard they work. So you should know this by heart. So the symbology of the planets is something that you guys, the more you practice, the better you'll get at it. But just, it's good to know the most fundamental elements of each planet. That way, when you're looking at a chart, you get an idea of what it means when a certain planet is in a certain house. So descriptions of signs are symbolic of the significations of the grahas ruling those signs. So what does that mean? Basically, each planet rules 2 signs, except for the nodes of the moon. They only rule 1 sign each, and they co-rule with another planet. And the sun and the moon, Rahu and Ketu, only rule 1 planet, and the sun and the moon only rule 1 sign. I meant to say sign. Basically, what that means is that the signs that they rule have the same personality traits or characteristics of the planet itself. So, for example, Mars rules Aries and Scorpio. So whatever the meanings of the signs are also relate to the planet. So it'll be easier for you guys to remember what signs the planets rule, because the signs that they rule have the same traits as the planet itself. Like, for example, Taurus and Libra are ruled by Venus. So right away, you already get an image of the signs Taurus and Libra, that both of those signs have to do with artistic qualities, with love, with relationship, with beauty, with aesthetic sense, etc. For example, Mars rules Aries and Scorpio. So right away, you get a sense of those 2 signs by just knowing the significations of the planets. What the planet indicates, you already get an idea of what the sign indicates. So this makes your job a little bit easier. If you haven't memorized all 12 signs of the zodiac, and you know there's 12 of them, and they have so many characteristics, which I'll also go over those as we go through the planets. It'll be easier for you guys if you already know what the planets themselves stand for. Every planet has its virtues and its vices. So when a planet is strong in a chart, it will show its virtues more than its vices. And it may not have any vices. When a planet is not afflicted and it is strong in a chart, then the planet will show the positive traits of what it signifies in the person's life. Like, for example, Saturn. If Saturn is strong in a chart and it's not afflicted, then that means the person is responsible, committed, and hardworking. And they keep their promises, and they follow through until the end. But if Saturn is afflicted in a person's chart, then we already know that the person has trouble sticking to commitments, and they have trouble taking responsibility for things, and they don't like working, etc. So depending on the strength of the planet, you get an idea of how the person expresses the qualities of the planet. Does the person express the virtues of the planet, or does the person express the vice of the planet, the negative attributes? And you'll get a sense of that when you start looking at the chart. Is it afflicted by Rahu and Ketu? Is it afflicted by Mars, Saturn, the Sun? Those are the planets that tend to afflict. Or is it strengthened by the aspect of Jupiter, by its conjunction with Venus or the Moon, or a positive Mercury in a chart? That will enhance its virtues, but because those are the benefic planets, and those are the ones that enhance the positive qualities of a sign. Now, the disposition of each planet in a chart shows whether the person is expressing the virtue or vice of the planet, and that is what I was just talking about. Okay. Lindsay asked, what do you mean by afflicted? So basically, when a planet is afflicted, that means that it is conjoined Rahu or Ketu, and or it is aspected by Mars or Saturn or the Sun. So if there's any association with a malefic planet, the natural malefic planets are the Sun, but that one's cruel. Rahu and Ketu, which are the nodes of the moon, they're grahas. They're not really planets, but they're points in the sky, mathematical points. They're the ones that cause the eclipses on the Sun and the Moon. And later we'll talk about the mythology of Rahu and Ketu and why they cause the eclipses in a mythological and symbolic way. But and then Saturn and Mars. So these grahas, these planets, are the ones that cause affliction. So I already went over the Sun and the Moon on class number 2. And on class number 2 is actually where I originally meant to go through all the 9 grahas. But I started with the Sun and the Moon, and it just ended up being only about the Sun and the Moon. So we just went into so much detail about the symbology, about the significations of the Sun and the Moon on class number 2 that I did. So if you guys want to get really into the Sun and the Moon, I suggest watching that class. It's very interesting. And then we had Yotsna's husband, Vikas. He was in that class, and he's already an advanced astrologer as well. And he was asking some very good questions and making some very good points. So he was making additional points that I might not have covered. So it just made the class a lot more interesting, and it made the class a lot longer in discussing the Sun and the Moon. But I decided to include them here again because I felt that if I didn't include the Sun and the Moon in this class, that it would just be incomplete. So I'll go over this again, but I'll go over the Sun and the Moon a little bit more quickly than last time. Okay, so the Sun rules the sign of Leo, and that's the natural 5th sign. So it corresponds with the 5th house of the zodiac. So the 5th sign of Leo and the 5th house have an intrinsic connection with the Sun, Surya. Its constitution is Pitta, which means fiery in Ayurveda. In Ayurveda, the planets have constitutions, and so wherever the planet is placed, let's say it's on the ascendant, on the 1st house of the person's chart, then if the person has two fiery planets on the 1st house, the person will be very fiery. They'll probably be thin, and they'll be very energetic and very active. Let's say the person has 2 watery planets on the 1st house, such as the Moon, which is a Kapha planet, or Venus and the Moon and Jupiter, or any of the 3, any combination. Then the person will be very watery, especially if they have a watery ascendant, such as Pisces or Cancer or Scorpio. Then the person will probably be overweight and they will be inclined to have a large appetite because the kapha, the Ayurvedic kapha is a watery substance. And watery planets or the constitution kapha is watery. It tends to make the person overweight. And then the last one is vata, and that one's airy, ruled by the element of air. And people with vata tend to be very thin, very skinny. So as a pitta person will be muscular. They'll be thin, but they'll be muscular. So if a person has Simha, which is Leo, as their ascendant, then that person will probably be muscular unless there's watery planets on the ascendant. But like if the person has a Vata ascendant or planet, then they'll be very thin, but they won't have muscles. They'll just be very skinny. Okay, so the traits of the sun gives the person a square body, majestic appearance, powerful speech, makes the person courageous, and it bestows administrative capability. And that's because the sun naturally, is strong in the 10th house of career, and the sun is a natural king. And so being the king, he has administrative capabilities. Now, I have a question here by Lindsay. She says, how would the overweight person overcome being overweight? Well, that would have to do with the person's choices. You know, if a person has kapha in their chart, a lot of kapha, it'll probably be more challenging. It'll be more due to genetics, the reason that they're overweight. So it'll probably be more challenging to lose the weight. But if they start applying pitta into their life, so if they start exercising a lot and playing a lot of sports and, you know, conjuring up all the Mars energy, then they'll be increasing the fire in their life. So that, you know, whatever you do in your life, the more you do it, you increase that energy, you increase that quality. And so in a larger perspective, in a short-term perspective, you'll start losing weight, obviously. In a larger perspective, in terms of like, you know, reincarnation, then in your next life, you'll naturally be thin because you already put on that hard work in a previous life. Same with how you're naturally inclined in this life. You know, if you tended to overeat a lot in a past life, or any characteristic, if you tended to be if you tended to read a lot and do a lot of math, then you'll be good in your next life. So in a way, that's how it works. The more you do something, the more you strengthen it in your chart, and you'll strengthen it in your life. For example, people start learning astrology in this life. Some people will not be very good at it, and they may have just started learning astrology in this lifetime. So there's some people who it takes them a long time to really get it, to really understand it. And there's other people who start learning astrology and boom, like all of a sudden they're really good. They learn things really fast. They understand intuitively. It's already inherent. It's in their subconscious mind, and reawaken those qualities. And then it'll just reawaken. The people who've never done astrology in their past lives or ever, you know, it'll take a little bit longer, but the harder, if they put a lot of hard work in this life, then next life, if they learn astrology again, it'll be easier. And then the next life, it'll be even easier. So that just goes with any trait. It'll just get easier the more that you do it. So, hope that answered your question in regards to weight, Lindsay. So as this person who has a strong sun in their chart, if the sun is strong in the person's chart, then they will have these attributes. They'll express these natural attributes of the sun. They'll have a majestic appearance, especially if it's on their first house, if the sun is placed on in their first house. They'll have powerful speech. And as I was saying, they'll have administrative capabilities. The sun is strong in the 10th house of career, along with Mars. So the fire usually tends to go towards career. The sun is one of the planets, grahas, that you look to see how a person's career is going to be, if the person's going to have administrative capabilities. Its complexion is blood red and it rules orange, pink, golden colors. The fire element, hot or pungent flavors, the sense of sight, the sun, out of the 7 days of the week, Sunday. Sun rules Sunday, which makes sense. The east direction, because the sun rises in the east. Copper, gold, and ruby. So the reason that they describe these characteristics of the planets is because if you want to invoke the energy of a particular graha, then you can do it either through doing things having to do with that planet's significations, such as powerful speech. If you strengthen your speech in public, you're strengthening the sun. If you become more courageous by doing things that you're naturally afraid to do, but you do them in order to become more courageous, you're strengthening the sun. However, you can also strengthen the positive energy of that graha in your life by doing things, by propitiating the planet. So when you propitiate the planet, you do things on Sunday specifically for the sun, and then you could have like a little altar, and you put things on the altar that have the fire element, like a candle, or hot and pungent flavor, like you put some food that has hot and pungent flavor, and then you put a piece of gold, a ruby, or you wear a ruby and you start wearing a ruby on Sunday, or and you face the east direction when you chant a mantra for the sun, for example. So that's why it gives you these traits of each graha, of each planet, so that if you want to connect to the energy of that particular planet, then you can do so, using the qualities that the planet represents. Let's see here. I think I have another question. Can we have copies of these slides or some kind of worksheet? I might be able to give you guys copies. I'll let you guys know at the end how we'll work it out. So the places for the sun are temples, deserts, palaces, government buildings, and towers. And the physical things that the sun rules are health in general, vitality. So if the sun represents the first house, so it naturally represents your vitality. The sun is what gives life to things. So if you have a strong sun in your chart, you naturally have strong vitality. You're healthy. You're strong. It represents bone structure, the general constitution, the blood, the brain, bile, digestive fire, organ of the voice, the heart, as it is the life center, the right eye for males and the left eye for females, and I have no clue why, they're attributed in that manner. I have no idea. And then I added some additional traits here. I'm not going to go through every single one, but the sun is the king of the planetary cabinet. So in the planetary cabinet, you have kings, you have ministers, you have the workers, the military guys and all that. So the sun tends to be the king. And so as the king, it signifies people in high places. So people who are naturally, who have positions of power in the government, for example, because the government's one of the things that the sun symbolizes. These people have a strong sun in their chart because they have administrative capabilities, the president, because the sun signifies the king. So the president is signified by the sun. The master, the CEO of a company, the head of a company. These are all represented by the sun, but it is also represented by physicians or chemists, pharmacists, politicians, police as well. Anything that has to do with positions of power. These are all represented by the sun, and social status in general, because the sun is a king, so the sun is royal. So people who have high social status, they're represented by the sun as well. And then the sun also rules children because it rules Leo, which is the natural fifth house of the zodiac, and the fifth house has to do with children. So with sun ruling the sign of Leo, which is Simha, it also rules children, specifically boys, if you want to get technical about it in a chart, but it rules children in general and progeny and the ability to have children. And it is a second significator for husband, whereas Jupiter is the first significator for a husband. And then just quickly, it represents self-confidence, courage, nobility, dignity, all these high qualities. These are the qualities that it'll represent as its vice. If the sun is strong. So if the sun is weak in a person's chart, it'll represent the opposite of these qualities that I'm saying here. So these qualities are self-confidence, courage, nobility, dignity, ambition, splendor, prestige, faith, loyalty, generosity, authority, power, leadership, and creativity. Okay. And as I said, the sun rules Simha, which is Leo, the fifth house. I didn't put the physical significations, but physically it stands for the stomach and anything, the digestive system, because the digestive system is fiery. It burns up the food that you eat. So the Simha, which is Leo, represents the stomach and the digestive system. And then being the natural fifth house, the fifth house has, so I'll be going through the planets, the signs, and the houses as well, because as I go through the signs, I'll be talking about the natural house that it is in the zodiac. So I'll be going through what the houses symbolize as well. So the natural fifth house has to do with intelligence. This is the house of children. This is the first house that you look to when a person has a question regarding children. The fifth house is also the house of intelligence. It has to do with emotions as well, but it has to do more with discernment and discrimination. So it is good to look at the fifth house to see how a person's mind works. If the person is intelligent, or if the person has any mental disorders, for example. You look to the fifth house as well. The fifth house will be able to show you how strong the person's ability to discriminate between good and bad, to be able to discriminate between virtue and vice. So if a person has a really weak fifth house, then they might not be able to discriminate between good and bad, and they might do bad things because they're not able to discriminate the value of things in that sense. It represents memory, creative intelligence. So the fifth house has to do with creativity, procreation. That's why it has to do with children, creating children, procreating, or creating anything in general. So the fifth house is one of the key houses to look at for artists, poets, people who create, painters, actors and actresses. It has to do with the entertainment industry. So with movies, anything that has to do with entertainment, having fun, enjoying yourself. That's the fifth house. And children, they have fun. All they want to do is they want to play and they want to have fun. So that's what the fifth house has to do with, and that's what the sign of Leo has to do with. Entertainment and having fun. And connected to that, which because it's connected to procreativity with children, the fifth house also has to do with romance. And it's when you are dating someone, and it has to do with the initial phase of dating. When you're going out, going to the movies, going to dinners, and then going to places of entertainment together, this is the fifth house. So if the person has, for example, relationships such as marriage has to do with the seventh house. The seventh house is the one that is connected with marriage, with contracts. But the fifth house is connected with romance and with dating. Just one second, guys. Okay, say that again.
Sandeep and Lindsay have a question for you.
Okay, let's see here. What advice would you give this person to improve their fifth house? So basically, what I'll do is I'll have a separate class that has to do with remedial measures, because that's a whole subject in its own, and we can spend a long time. But that's actually a good question, and that's a good class. It's part of Jyotish, knowing what to do with remedial measures. So you don't just learn Jyotish and you don't just tell people what their problems are and then you just say, okay, bye-bye, have a nice day. It doesn't work that way. You learn Jyotish, but you also learn remedial measures. So I'll have another class in one of the future classes where I'll actually go through all the remedial measures, and I'll actually give you guys tools such as mantras for each of the planets and gemstones, etc. So I'll do that for sure, but I'll do it in a future class for you guys.
Okay. I have a question for you, Monica. I cannot ignore this, but do you have anything to do with the circle and the dot in the Surya picture? I'm not able to ignore that.
Okay, yeah, that's the symbol for the sun. So
symbol in the sense
like if you draw it on a piece of paper.
Oh, okay.
So like if you draw it on a piece of paper, instead of writing sun, or even in a software program, if you want to look at the sigils, remember I showed you guys the sigils last class? So this is the sigil for the sun.
Okay.
So let me see here. Let me show you. Right here. See, I showed you guys the sigils for the planets. See, this is the glyph for the sun. And so, yeah, so every planet has its own glyph and symbol. If you want to just draw it instead of writing it out. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, so the fifth house also has to do with learning, with wisdom and knowledge. So it has to do with education in general, and it has to do with training, and it has to do with fall from position. And I'll explain why. Just one second. Okay, so there's a thing in Vedic astrology called Bhavat Bhavam. And basically what that means is that a house from a specific location in a chart will display those traits of the house. So for example, why is the fifth house fall from position? The reason for that is because it is the eighth house from the 10th. And the eighth house in general has to do with challenges, with losses, with obstacles. So the eighth house from every house will have obstacles towards that house. Okay? Or the ninth house from a particular house will give benefits towards that house, etc. So the fifth house, even though it is actually a really good house, it's a Dharma house, it's a house having to do with purpose in life, even though it's a lucky house and it has to do with wealth as well, but it has to do with fall from position. So the way it could play out in a person's life is there's a fall from position, they lose one job, but then they get a better job. So, but usually when a person is going through a fifth house planet, a planet that rules the fifth house in their Mahadasha, planetary cycle, then that person will probably change jobs during that time. Okay. Now, the personality of Leo is it is a fiery sign, ruled by the sun, and it has to do with the same qualities of the sun and of the fifth house, which we already talked about. And now the shadow side, every sign and planet has its vice or the shadow side. So the shadow side of Leo is if they have too much sun going on in their chart, then they'll display the shadow side of being too self-centered, or the opposite, which is they lack confidence, or selfish because the sun is generous by nature. You know, it gives light to everybody, good and bad. But if the sun is afflicted, then the person may be a little bit selfish or have a sense of entitlement, where they feel like other people have to do the grunt work. This is something that has to do with the fire signs. So Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius, if people have planets in these signs, they don't like to do the grunt work. They want to do the big and brave things in life. They want to go and save the world, but everyone else should take care of the grunt work, the little details. Like everyone else can do the cleaning and the sweeping and whatever. So this is just the shadow side of the signs, and it doesn't mean everybody has it. It just has to do with if it's afflicted or not.